Chapter 5. I thought you would have made contact today, Murphy said. No good opportunity, Brody shook his head. I'm glad she's cautious, but it isn't making it easy to approach her. She's never really alone. Not necessarily a bad thing. True, and I'll probably have to make contact with her in some public place just so she'll feel relatively safe. Besides, since Duran has already made one move, he's more likely than not to move against her again sooner rather than later. I'd still like to know how she showed up on his radar. Duran was one of the few enemies, a leader on the other side that they could put a face to. Yet their best investigators had been able to find out nothing more about him than a name that led nowhere. He was a cipher, a deadly cipher. Yeah, you and me both. Look, go ahead and take off, get some rest. They've been splitting the watcher duties. Murphy said, okay, but I'm coming back to relieve you around 4. You'll need to rest yourself if you mean to approach her tomorrow. No argument. Brody settled down where they had decided was the best position to watch Tasha Solomon's condo during the night. The corner of a rooftop on a 3-story building that housed on its ground floor her favorite coffee shop. From their position, they could see both entrances to her building and had a good view of her corner apartment. Both the blinds and the curtains were drawn. Think she's in for the night? Yeah, pretty sure. Honestly, I don't think she'd risk going out at night right now. She's even more jumpy than before. The only time today she seemed able to put any worries or uneasiness out of her mind was when she was working at the shelter. Brody eyed Murphy. You think or you know? Think. Her walls are up and we haven't tried getting through. It might make my job easier if you do. Or the opposite. An alien voice in her mind spooked her. Duran's goons spooked her. If we push, she could get spooked enough to haul ass away from here, and I have a hunch she wouldn't be easy to track. At least not for us. The last thing we need is her in the wind. True enough. Get some rest, Murphy. See you around 4. She lifted a hand in a brief salute, then left the roof and made her way down to the street. She was somewhat preoccupied, tired, but not enough to stop her mind from considering various possibilities and probabilities, weighing her own options, still walking the fine line she had been walking for some time now. They had so few answers, so damn many questions, and too many psychics like Tasha Solomon in danger, and yet also in a position to possibly give them more information, more answers, what she knew, and what Duran might reveal in trying to get to her. Murphy had been involved in this secretive group they had never really named for several years now, and in her time the only certainty she felt able to count on was that there were 2 sides to this conflict. Not a war, exactly. Maybe a struggle to find and protect psychics from some mysterious other that wanted them. Reasons unknown. They did know of a few of the soldiers on the other side, the way they knew Duran, not where he was born or when or where he'd gone to school or really anything about his background. Duran headed up their field operations, most of them, they knew that, but who or what he reported to was a mystery. Still, after years, a mystery. So there was also a struggle to gather information, a struggle to understand, to learn who was behind this and why, to have it make sense somehow, to be able to look back and reaffirm that those who had fallen to the other side or because of them had given their freedom or their lives in a good and just cause. Melodramatic. Yes, but also true. There's just so damn much they didn't know. They hadn't even found a single way to protect psychics. Each one was a unique situation and called for unique measures to make them safe. Some were in hiding, not really living any kind of a normal life, and yet the only sort in which they felt even marginally safe. If you had taken the opposite tactic, going public in a major way, drawing media and other attention to themselves. Sarah Mackenzie came into Murphy's mind, at least in part because Sarah was both the most recent and the most successful case she knew of. With Tucker Mackenzie's celebrity status as a very famous best-selling author, and the publication of his book about his wife's rather astonishing abilities, garnering them both a lot of media attention, it at least appeared that Duran had backed off. They couldn't even find evidence that he had the couple under surveillance where they lived in Richmond. But they weren't sure, of course. They were never sure. And just when they thought they were sure of something, just when they thought there was a fact they could stand on, it was neatly pulled out from under them, usually by Duran. Don't think about Lee, don't think about the others lost along the way. But good people, damn it, good people. Murphy slipped away from the downtown area where Tasha Solomon's condo was situated, but she didn't return to the small apartment several blocks away, rented for the duration. Instead, after hesitating only briefly, she stood in the shadows of a darkened doorway on a quiet, peaceful street and pulled one of the burner cell phones from her bag. Dead. The next two were dead as well, and the batteries drained, even though they had not yet been turned on. Murphy cursed under her breath, making a mental note to charge all of them later tonight. The fifth one she charged still had some power, maybe enough. She punched in a number, always the same one. He never worried they could trace the call, even ping the cell he always used, because they had never been able to. Damn it. Yes? Murphy recited the address of a bar a couple blocks from her location, a dark place, open late, quieter than most bars, its patrons mostly intent on drowning their sorrows, and not interested in what was going on around them while they did so. 15 minutes, she said. I can make it in 10, he responded, calm as ever. It was a little game they played. Murphy tried to gauge how close by he was at any given time, and he consistently surprised her. So you are in Charleston, she said. Didn't you expect me to be? Murphy didn't want to talk about what she expected, not during a cell call, so all she said was, see you there. She didn't wait for a response, just ended the call, turned off the phone, and removed its battery. She then went on her way, tossing the phone and battery into different trash receptacles. He's here himself, which means Tasha Solomon is more important than we know. Maybe more powerful, more useful somehow? Or is it just one more game of his to keep us guessing, to keep me guessing? Murphy headed toward the bar, wondering vaguely if the high wire she walked was actually visible beneath her, and wondering how long she could continue to walk it before she lost her balance and fell, undoubtedly into a very unpleasant pit. Jeffrey Bell hadn't asked to become psychic, and since the car accident that had resulted in a head injury hadn't been his fault, he felt a bitter sense of resentment toward the universe that hadn't just ended up with a total car, but pretty much a wrecked life as well. Please, her voice even over the phone was desperate. You have to help me, Mr. Bell. You don't know me, but he didn't want to listen to another of the stories that had begun to haunt every day of his life. Listen, he said to her, keeping his voice even and calm, even as he made a mental note to himself to change his home number yet again, and to fucking screen his calls with voicemail. I can't help you, lady, really. I can't just flip a switch and predict something for you or anyone else. But I just need to know if he'll come back, and that's something I can't tell you. I'm sorry. If we met in person, nothing would change, somewhat grudgingly he added. If I'm going to see anything at all, your voice would have been enough of a trigger. At least that's the way it's been so far. Look, I'm sorry, but I just can't help you. But, sorry, he repeated, then hung up the phone and immediately unplugged it. So far, nobody had gotten his cell number, but he figured it was only a matter of time. He could give up the landline, change cell numbers, move again as he had moved here to Atlanta only a month previously. It wouldn't help. Sooner rather than later, they would begin to find him again, the desperate, the lost, the greedy, needing something from him, urgent and pleading, sometimes demanding, as if he owed them. In Jeffrey's mind, he didn't owe anybody a damn thing, except maybe a kick in the balls to the universe, if he could have done that. Because his life had been fun before the accident. A job he found satisfying, an apartment perfect for his needs, friends and family around. Normal. But nothing had been normal since the accident. Family and friends, if they believed him at all, were wary of him, avoided him, clearly uneasy about what he might tell them. And it looked spooky, he'd been told, whenever a new face or a voice or a place triggered one of his visions. His girlfriend told him he went white, his eyes went dark, and his stillness, for minutes at a time, was truly creepy to see. She told him that just before she dumped him. As for his job, they hadn't said he was being laid off because of what he was suddenly able to do. The economy, they said. I'm sorry, Jeff, but you know how it is. His supervisor sounded calm, in the way that someone very nervous forced himself to be calm. But there's always a demand for IT people, so I'm sure you won't have trouble finding another job. You'll have an excellent recommendation from us, I can assure you of that. Except Jeffrey had responded evenly, there's this lousy economy that might factor into my ability to get another job. Yes, well, maybe a different city. He didn't quite say the more distance Jeffrey put between them, the better. Except that was what he was saying. Jeffrey had risen to his feet and headed for the door, almost wishing he knew something he could have tossed over his shoulder, something seriously spooky. But he had discovered that his quote-unquote abilities were beyond his control, grabbing him unexpectedly in damn inconvenient moments and virtually never something he could trigger at will. So he cleaned out his cubicle and he left. He left, moving temporarily to New York where he could feel anonymous, sending out resumes all over the country. And the job offer from a company in Atlanta had been reassuringly prompt. A better job, actually. And he had tried to avoid betraying this gift he had been cursed with, had tried to limit his contact with other people, avoiding crowds whenever possible, remaining detached from others emotionally, doing his best to isolate himself. And it worked for about 2 lonely weeks, and then somebody Googled him because he was so quiet and kept to himself, and the gossip started. The questions asked jokingly became patently uneasy. Somebody blabbed about him, there was an anonymous tip or two to the newspapers, and word got out. Word got out and people began contacting him, the desperate, the lost, the greedy, believing he could help them find something, someone, pick a winning lottery number, believing he was the answer to all their problems, believing he could make their lives better, or at least reassure them that their lives would have meaning. And then there were the disbelievers, the ones who wanted to challenge him, test him, prove he was a fraud. So here he was, packing a bag to go stay in a hotel because his address had been posted by some nitwit on Twitter and Facebook, who had thoughtfully tagged a whole bunch of the Roswell, Area 51, ghost hunting paranormal believers. And he knew all too well what that would mean. People turning up at his door, a lot of people. Jeffrey was nearly packed when a vision slammed into him, as they sometimes did, without warning. Darkness. Then the overwhelming, unsettling sounds of whispering as though from 1,000 voices, 10,000, all saying things he couldn't quite hear. And the darkness lifted just enough for him to have a sense of vast space all around him. Space filled with shadows. misshapen, sliding away when he tried to focus on them, somehow alien, unknowable, moving all around him, the faint rustling sounds they made closer than the whispers. Unthreatening at first, he had the odd idea they were talking among themselves, discussing him, weighing him somehow. Was he valuable enough? Was he ready? Whatever their conclusions, Jeffrey felt and sensed them coming closer, reaching out for him, almost touching him. He had no idea what it meant, but an almost primal fear sliced through him suddenly, as sharp and cold as a knife, and he fought to escape the shadows, the vision. Don't let them touch you. Don't let them have you. He fought as hard as he could, and he almost got away. Almost. He could feel it, like surfacing in a pool and sensing the warmth of sunlight on his face, beginning to open his eyes to brightness. But then, beneath the surface, something caught at him, tugged, dragged him back down into the dark water. Nobody heard his scream, nobody that mattered. Days later, when his concerned boss asked the building super to check on him, his apartment was deserted. His clothing and personal belongings gone, including the boxes he hadn't even had time to unpack. The apartment keys left on the kitchen counter. Nobody was really surprised that he had left. Nobody in Atlanta had known him very well, but the rumors had circulated, and it seemed reasonable to believe he had just moved again, to escape the people who had left desperate notes and pleas stuck to his door in a multicolored sea of Post-its. To escape his creepy abilities, maybe. In any case, Jeffrey Bell was gone, and no one ever saw him again. Tasha spent another mostly sleepless night after the incident with the mirror. She had wiped the words away with a towel, convincing herself that the men who had been there the previous night had somehow left the message for her, a message that would only appear later when she showered and steamed up the room. It didn't help. Who were they? Why were they after her? Was it because she was psychic? And if so, why? That alien voice in her head had said we had more questions than answers about them, but how could that be? Tasha had never believed in conspiracies, firmly of the opinion that it just wasn't human nature to keep any secret for long. By her reckoning, only some military or intelligence agency secrets were kept quiet for years, decades. Except, now that she was thinking about it, she supposed she couldn't say with certainty that no people, no organization could keep a secret indefinitely. No way to prove a negative. So maybe there were secrets out there. Maybe there were a lot of them. But a secret organization kidnapping or killing psychics for no discernible reason, and whose activities most of the people around them never even noticed. That didn't just seem unlikely, it seemed absurd. Today's mainstream media was an around-the-clock business, hungry for headlines on dozens, if not hundreds of channels and newspapers and magazines. And when you added to that all the internet and social media, the websites, the blogs, the tweets and Facebook pages, and the fact that virtually nothing could happen without someone capturing it on a video camera or cell camera and posting it on YouTube or Instagram, well, nothing could happen unseen in the United States, at least. Still, she couldn't help wondering if that was why. Although she felt watched almost all the time, she only really felt threatened once it got dark. Did they move at night, in the middle of the night, largely to avoid attention? Made sense, if anything in all this made sense. Though that didn't, of course, explain how they were able to gain access to her building, her apartment, when it was so well guarded. Not that Tasha had asked building security any questions or asked to see the security footage from that night. She hadn't asked them and didn't know why she hadn't asked them, except she really didn't know who to trust. So Tasha tossed and turned most of the night, napping more than sleeping, and felt both unrested and on edge when she pulled herself from bed around 8 that Sunday morning. On past lazy Sundays, she'd often taken a book to the park, but she wasn't sure if she could even concentrate long enough to sit down and read. She did, however, want her usual morning coffee, so as soon as she was up and dressed, she made her way out and through the typical Sunday traffic and foot traffic, which was a bit thin as usual this early, but would pick up later in the day after church. She went to her usual place at the coffee shop and placed her usual order. The Sunday morning customers sitting outside were reading newspapers or talking on their cell phones or texting or whatever, preoccupied with their own lives. Normal. Tasha wished that reassured her. It didn't. Her order came. She sipped coffee, picked at a very large muffin, and wished she'd thought to get a newspaper or bring one of her books to at least pretend to read. She'd fit in better with the others. A folded newspaper landed on the table near her elbow, and a man sat down across from her. Oddly enough, though he was big and dark and a total stranger, Tasha felt no threat from him. "What? Sorry, this is so sudden." His voice was deep, calm, pleasant. "We've never really figured out the best way to make contact. You all tend to be wary, at least, sometimes scared. So all we really know for sure is never to come to you in the night, the darkness, because that's when the goon squad usually shows up." Tasha sat very still, watching him as he sipped a large coffee she was willing to bet was just black, nothing fancy. He had the sharpest eyes she'd ever seen, eyes that seemed to see her with uncomfortable clarity, and as lazily comfortable as he looked slumped down in his seat, as unthreatening, she could also see that he had to be physically powerful, very powerful. "Your name is Tasha Solomon. My name is John Brody, and I've been sent to help you, to protect you." "I can take care of myself," she said slowly. "Are you the voice I've had in my head?" No answer to that. "Yes, you can," he said matter-of-factly. "Training, good instincts, the ability to think on your feet and make good choices. You've chosen a building with outstanding security, and you take care never to be alone unless you're securely locked inside your condo." "Have you been watching me?" she demanded. He answered readily, if inexplicably, "Yes, for the last couple of days, but I'm not the one you felt watching you." "Why not?" "Because I'm not psychic, and because psychics generally don't pick up on me unless I let them, and because you know very well I'm no threat to you." "How would I know that?" "You feel it. You always feel when you're being watched, when there's a threat nearby. And sometimes I'm guessing there's an alien voice in your mind that scares you. Something you know doesn't belong to you, something that isn't natural." "So that's common among the psychics you found?" Tasha said, admitting nothing. "Not all, but some." "Who does that voice belong to?" "We aren't sure about that inner voice that feels unnatural to you psychics, though sometimes we try to make contact telepathically, and I'm told that inner voice feels entirely different to you. I'm just not sure how." "You're not sure much, are you?" Brody didn't take offense. "Unfortunately, no." "So why do I need you?" She was still speaking slowly, studying him, still conscious of no threat from him, and still feeling relatively safe with people all around them. "Because the other side wants you, badly, and unless you have a better idea of just what's going on and what you're up against, the best training and instincts in the world can't keep you safe." He paused and added deliberately, "Just like the arguably best security in your building couldn't keep them out when they wanted in." Bishop emerged from the bedroom of the small apartment and offered a grim shake of his head when Miranda lifted her eyes questioningly. "No sign of Katie at all," he said. "No sign anyone's lived here. No books on the shelves. Nothing personal on the walls. All the closets and drawers empty. It's clear the apartment super has this place ready for a new tenant but hasn't rented it yet. It's been recently cleaned, Miranda offered. It was her turn to frown. Odd, though. What? Well, cleaning services usually leave a place smelling of lemon or pine or something to signal to anyone coming in that it's been recently cleaned. I don't smell that. I feel the place is clean, but it isn't because of a scent. Not at least a scent I recognize. With a sigh, Bishop said, right now I'm wishing one of us were either clairvoyant or had some psychometric ability. Spider senses? You know as well as I do, they're difficult to use at full strength when we have our connection closed down, and I've never been especially good at picking up an energy signature except from a person. I even tried touching Katie's bed, but I'm almost positive the bed in that room is brand new, or at least the mattresses. They think of everything. Apparently, her boss says she resigned by letter. This apartment is empty of any sign she ever lived here. The keys were left on the kitchen counter, all utilities paid up, and she didn't ask for her security deposit. Even her car has vanished, probably to a chop shop. Its parts being shipped all over the country by now. You think they work that fast? I think by now they're a well-oiled machine when it comes to disappearing people, and all without making the authorities the least bit suspicious. Miranda brooded for a moment, her electric blue eyes tracking slowly around the living room of the small apartment. Always psychics, and almost all of them living alone. They really don't take people with family, do they? Usually, no. There are a few cases I turned up where an entire family died in a house fire or car accident, including a psychic, or a body made to resemble that psychic well enough to raise no question of identity. But cases like that are rare. Extremely rare. I don't know what Brody and his people have turned up, but I've been tracking psychics long enough to feel pretty sure that most of those who disappear have no family or significant other to worry and pester the police. Though there often is a recent or fairly recent breakup of a marriage, engagement, or romantic relationship. Being psychic can be hard on relationships, Miranda noted wryly. We've seen that play out more than once, especially if only one of a couple has abilities. That's certainly true, and in most of the breakups where I could find a cause, it was easily traced back to a freaked-out significant other. Some were recent enough that they noticed someone they'd once loved had gone missing, but others just seemed to accept whatever the official determination ended up being. Assuming a report was even filed, there are virtually no investigations into the disappearances. Didn't you say Katie had recently broken up with a fiancé? Yeah, she's not a born psychic. Her telekinetic abilities were apparently triggered when she was thrown from a horse and suffered a head injury just about 2 years ago. She struggled to control what she could do, and it was a real struggle for her. I gather the fiancé more or less freaked out during an episode in which Katie lost her temper and most of the pictures in the room went flying off the walls. The fiancé left half his stuff behind when he packed up and left. She told me he was in such a hurry to just get away from her. Miranda shook her head. That poor girl, we could have helped her. I tried to convince her of that, but it was still too new to her, something she had to deny existed, and that made her vulnerable to them. If they found as few telekinetics as we have, a couple of bitter entries about supposedly psychic girlfriends on Facebook would have alerted them to what she could do. The fiancé, I gather, trying to hide the fact that anything paranormal had actually happened, claimed she rigged the room just to scare the shit out of him so he'd leave. Dryly, Miranda said there are easier ways to break up. Oh yeah, but everything has to be dramatic these days, especially on social media and among certain age groups. And way too many people, especially young people, share way too much personal information online with strangers. Bishop shook his head, although it does help us. We have programs running to flag certain words and phrases used in social media and people to monitor and check them out. This enemy Brody has described has to have the same kind of arrangement or something very like it, especially to be able to move this fast. I wonder if they meet as many kooks as we do, Miranda murmured. Probably. Maybe why they hang back and watch for a while. The 6-month window Brody mentioned for new psychics is probably just allowing them the time to watch and find out if the psychic is genuine and what he or she can do. I'm betting Katie wasn't on their radar until that Facebook post got shared by a few thousand friends, and it was just about 6 months ago. After you'd already talked to her. Which makes me wonder if my spy network is actually better than theirs. You spent years building it, and you have an awful lot of people from all walks of life on the lookout for potential psychics. People who really know what to look for and who report to you pronto. Bishop frowned again. Brody seemed convinced that the enemy in all this makes use of at least some psychics to search for others. Well, we have psychics who serve the same function. Even if that wasn't how we found Katie, we do find psychics that way, which is why we have our connection shut down and are both behind the shield. She always referred to it that way, as the shield rather than hers, even though it was one she had built to safeguard herself and her sister years before, after a serial killer had destroyed the rest of her family and left her and Bonnie in hiding in more ways than one. It was a remarkable thing, her shield, and unique. Bishop completely trusted the protection it afforded them, but it did have its drawbacks, and one of them was leaving both of them with diminished senses, including their extra ones. We'll find her, Miranda said quietly, able to read her husband accurately despite that. Brody said they'd never been able to recover a psychic once he or she was taken. Miranda Bishop smiled. That was before we